The forest was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. The boy, no older than 18, trudged through the dense undergrowth, his boots crunching against the dry leaves. He was used to the woods, it was his backyard, his playground, his escape. But today, something felt off. The air was heavy, and the birds had stopped singing. He paused, listening. That's when he heard it, a low, mechanical hum, like nothing he'd ever heard before. Curiosity got the better of him. He followed the sound, pushing aside branches, and stepping over fallen logs. The hum grew louder, more urgent. And then he saw it, a massive, metallic object half buried in the ground, smoke rising from its jagged edges. It wasn't a plane or a helicopter. It was something else entirely, something alien. His heart raced as he approached the wreckage. The boy had always been curious, always the one to help stray animals or fix broken things. But this? This was beyond anything he'd ever encountered. The ship's surface was smooth and cold, covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. He reached out to touch it, but a sudden groan from inside made him freeze. Someone was in there. Without thinking, he climbed onto the ship, his hands trembling as he pulled at the twisted metal. The door was jammed, but he managed to pry it open just enough to squeeze inside. The interior was dark, filled with blinking lights and strange equipment. And there, in the corner, lay a girl. She was unconscious, her face pale and her clothes torn. Blood trickled from a wound on her forehead. The boy hesitated for a moment. Who was she? Where had she come from? But there was no time for questions. He carefully lifted her into his arms, surprised by how light she was. Her skin was warm, and he could feel her shallow breaths against his chest. She was alive, but barely. He carried her out of the ship and into the forest, his mind racing. What if someone saw him? What if they thought he'd done this to her? But he pushed those thoughts aside. Right now, all that mattered was getting her to safety. The walk back to his village felt like an eternity. He avoided the main paths, sticking to the shadows. His small house was on the edge of the village, far enough from prying eyes. He laid the girl on his bed and quickly fetched some water and bandages. He wasn't a doctor, but he knew enough to clean her wounds and stop the bleeding. As he worked, he couldn't help but notice the strange bracelet on her wrist. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen, made of a shimmering material that seemed to shift colors in the light. The symbol on it glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. He wondered what it meant. Hours passed, and the girl showed no signs of waking. The boy sat by her side, his mind filled with questions. Who was she? What was she doing here? And why did he feel such a strong urge to protect her? As the sun began to set, the girl stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked around, confused and disoriented. When her gaze landed on the boy, she tensed, her hand instinctively reaching for the bracelet on her wrist. She muttered something in a language he didn't understand, her voice weak but urgent. The boy held up his hands, trying to show her he meant no harm. It's okay, he said softly. You're safe. The girl stared at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then, as if deciding he could be trusted, she relaxed slightly. She touched the bracelet, and a soft light emanated from it. A moment later, she spoke again, this time in his language. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But you don't understand, they're coming. The boy frowned. Who's coming? Before she could answer, a loud crash echoed from outside. The boy rushed to the window and peered out. His heart sank. A group of soldiers, dressed in black armor and carrying weapons he didn't recognize, were marching toward his house. They moved with precision, their faces hidden behind dark helmets. The girl's voice broke through his panic. You have to run, she said, her eyes filled with fear. If they find me here, they'll kill us both. The boy turned to her, his mind racing. The boy's heart pounded as he glanced out the window again. The soldiers were closer now, their heavy boots crunching against the gravel path. He turned back to the girl, his mind racing. We need to go. Now. The girl nodded weakly, but she was still too injured to move on her own. The boy quickly grabbed a blanket from the corner of the room and wrapped it around her shoulders. Hold on, he said, lifting her into his arms. She winced in pain but didn't protest. He moved swiftly, slipping out the back door, just as the soldiers reached the front of the house. The forest was their only chance. He knew every inch of these woods, every hidden path and secret trail. But with the girl in his arms, it would be harder to move quickly. The night was dark, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. The boy's breath came in short gasps as he navigated through the trees, careful not to make too much noise. Behind them, he could hear the soldiers shouting, their voices harsh and commanding. They were searching for her, and they wouldn't stop until they found her. The girl's voice broke the silence. Put me down, she whispered. You don't have to do this. You don't even know me. The boy shook his head. I'm not leaving you. Not after what I've seen. Just tell me where to go. She hesitated, then pointed toward a dense cluster of trees. There's a cave nearby. We can hide there. The boy adjusted his grip on her and headed in the direction she indicated. The cave was well hidden, its entrance covered by thick vines. He pushed them aside and stepped inside, setting the girl down gently on the cold stone floor. She leaned against the wall, her breathing shallow and uneven. For a moment, they sat in silence, listening for any signs of the soldiers. The boy's mind was a whirlwind of questions, but he didn't know where to start. Finally, he spoke. Who are you? Really? The girl looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. My name is, well, it doesn't matter right now. What matters is that I'm the last hope for my people. My father was the emperor of the Andarian Empire. But he was betrayed, and now the traitors are hunting me. If they find me, they'll kill me and take control of the empire. The boy stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. It sounded like something out of a storybook, not real life. But the soldiers outside, the strange ship, the glowing bracelet, it was all too real. Why are they after you? What do they want? Power, she said simply. The Empire controls vast resources, advanced technology, and countless worlds. The traitors want it all for themselves. But as long as I'm alive, they can't claim the throne. The boy frowned. And you think they'll stop at nothing to find you? She nodded. They'll destroy anyone who gets in their way. That's why you need to leave me. You've already done more than enough. The boy shook his head again. I'm not leaving you. I don't care how dangerous it is. I can't just walk away. The girl studied him for a long moment, as if trying to figure him out. Why are you doing this? She asked finally. You don't even know me. The boy shrugged. I don't know. Maybe because it's the right thing to do. Or maybe because I don't want to see you get hurt. A faint smile touched her lips. You're different from anyone I've ever met. Before he could respond, a loud noise echoed from outside the cave. The soldiers were getting closer. The boy's heart raced as he peeked out through the vines. He could see their flashlights cutting through the darkness, moving steadily toward the cave. We need to move, he whispered, turning back to the girl. Can you walk? She nodded, though it was clear she was still in pain. The boy helped her to her feet, and together they moved deeper into the cave. The air grew colder, and the walls closed in around them. But the boy didn't stop. He couldn't. As they walked, the girl reached for her bracelet and pressed a button. A holographic map appeared in the air, showing a detailed layout of the area. There's a hidden passage at the back of this cave, she said. It leads to an old escape pod. If we can reach it, we might be able to get off this planet. The boy's eyes widened. An escape pod? Where will it take us? Somewhere safe, she said. At least, I hope so. They hurried through the cave, following the map. The sound of the soldiers' voices grew fainter, but the boy knew they couldn't let their guard down. Not yet. Finally, they reached the back of the cave, where a large rock blocked their path. The girl pressed another button on her bracelet, and the rock slid aside, revealing a small, sleek pod. It looked ancient but functional. The boy helped the girl inside, then climbed in after her. The interior was cramped, with just enough room for the two of them. The girl activated the controls, and the pod hummed to life. "Hold on," she said, gripping the boy's hand. "This might be a rough ride." The boy nodded, his heart pounding. As the pod lifted off the ground and shot through the cave, the escape pod shot through the cave and into the night sky, leaving the soldiers far behind. The boy gripped the edges of his seat, his knuckles white as the pod rattled and shook. He had never been in anything like this before. The ground below grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely, replaced by the vast, endless expanse of space. The girl worked quickly at the controls, her hands moving with practiced precision. Despite her injuries, she seemed calm and focused. The boy watched her in awe, still trying to wrap his mind around everything that had happened. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "To a safe place," she replied, not taking her eyes off the controls. "A rebel outpost. They're loyal to my family. They'll help us." The boy nodded, though he had no idea what a rebel outpost was or what it would mean for them. He looked out the window, his breath catching in his throat. The stars stretched out in every direction, countless points of light against the blackness of space. It was beautiful, but also overwhelming. He had never imagined he would see something like this. The girl noticed his expression and gave him a small smile. "First time in space?" He nodded again, unable to find the words. "It's a lot to take in," she said softly. "But you'll get used to it." The boy wasn't so sure. Everything had happened so fast. Just hours ago, he had been living his simple life in the village, unaware that any of this existed. Now, he was hurtling through space with a girl who was the heir to an empire he had never even heard of. As the pod flew on, the girl leaned back in her seat, wincing in pain. The boy noticed the bloodstain on her shirt and frowned. "You're still hurt. Is there anything I can do?" She shook her head. "There's a medical kit in the back. Can you grab it for me?" The boy quickly unbuckled his seatbelt and crawled to the back of the pod. He found the kit and brought it to her, watching as she opened it and pulled out a small device. She pressed it against her wound, and a soft blue light emanated from it. The boy could see the pain in her face slowly easing. "What is that?" he asked, fascinated. "A healing device," she explained. "It's not perfect, but it'll help for now." The boy sat back down, his mind buzzing with questions. "How did you end up on my planet? And why were those soldiers after you?" The girl sighed, her expression darkening. "It's a long story. My father was a good man, a fair ruler. But there were those who wanted to take his power for themselves. They staged a coup, overthrew him, and took control of the empire. I barely escaped with my life. I was trying to reach the rebel outpost when my ship was attacked. I crashed on your planet, and, well, you know the rest." The boy listened intently, his heart aching for her. He couldn't imagine what it must be like to lose everything in an instant. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "That must have been terrible." She nodded, her eyes filled with sadness. "It was. But I can't give up. My people are counting on me. I have to fight back, no matter what it takes." The boy admired her courage. Despite everything she had been through, she was still determined to keep going. It made him feel small in comparison. He was just a boy from a village. What could he possibly do to help her? As if reading his thoughts, the girl reached over and placed a hand on his arm. "You've already done more than you know," she said. "If you hadn't found me, I wouldn't be here right now. You saved my life." The boy looked at her, surprised by her words. "I just did what anyone would have done." She shook her head. Not anyone. You're different. I can see it in you. Before he could respond, the pod's controls beeped loudly. The girl turned back to the console, her expression tense. We're being tracked, she said. They must have found us. The boy's stomach dropped. What do we do? The girl's hands flew over the controls. We'll have to make a jump to hyperspace. It's risky, but it's our only chance. The boy didn't know what hyperspace was, but he could tell from her tone that it was dangerous. He gripped the edges of his seat again as the girl activated the jump. The pod shuddered violently, and the stars outside blurred into streaks of light. The boy felt like his stomach was being pulled in 1,000 directions at once. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the shaking stopped. The pod was quiet, and the stars outside were still once more. The girl let out a breath she had been holding. We made it, she said, relief evident in her voice. The boy looked out the window, his eyes wide. They were in a completely different part of space now. The stars were arranged in unfamiliar patterns, and in the distance, he could see a small space station orbiting a planet. Is that the rebel outpost? He asked. The girl nodded. Yes. We'll be safe there. For now. The boy felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by the realization that their journey was far from over. The soldiers were still out there, and they wouldn't stop until they found her. As the pod approached the space station, the boy turned to the girl. What happens next? She met his gaze, her eyes filled with determination. We fight back. Together. The pod docked smoothly at the space station, its metallic clamps locking into place with a loud hiss. The boy peered out the window, his eyes wide with wonder. The station was massive, its corridors bustling with people in uniforms and strange, futuristic equipment. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. The girl unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, wincing slightly as she put weight on her injured leg. Stay close to me, she said, glancing at the boy. This place can be overwhelming if you're not used to it. The boy nodded, feeling out of place in his simple clothes. He followed her out of the pod and into the station, his heart racing as they walked through the crowded corridors. People glanced at them curiously, but no one stopped them. The girl seemed to know where she was going, her steps confident despite her injuries. They reached a large door at the end of a hallway, guarded by 2 armed soldiers. The girl approached them, her chin held high. I need to speak with the commander, she said firmly. The guards exchanged a glance, then one of them nodded and opened the door. Inside was a dimly lit room filled with holographic maps and glowing screens. A man stood in the center, his back to them as he studied the maps. He turned when he heard the door open, and his eyes widened in surprise. Your Highness, he said, bowing slightly. We weren't expecting you. The girl stepped forward, her expression serious. There's no time for formalities, Commander. The traitors are hunting me, and they're closer than we thought. We need to act now. The commander nodded, his face grim. We've been monitoring their movements. They've increased their patrols near the outer systems. If they find this station. They won't, the girl interrupted. Not if we strike first. The boy listened quietly, feeling like an outsider. He didn't understand half of what they were saying, but he could sense the urgency in their voices. The commander noticed him for the first time and raised an eyebrow. Who's this? He asked, gesturing to the boy. The girl glanced at him, her expression softening. This is the one who saved me. He risked his life to help me, and I owe him everything. The commander studied the boy for a moment, then nodded. You have our gratitude. But this is no place for a civilian. We'll arrange for him to be taken to a safe location. The boy's heart sank. He didn't want to be sent away. He wanted to help, even if he didn't know how. Before he could say anything, the girl spoke up. No, she said firmly. He stays with me. He's proven himself more than capable, and I trust him. The commander hesitated, then nodded. As you wish, Your Highness. The girl turned to the boy, her eyes filled with determination. Are you sure you want to do this? It's going to be dangerous. The boy met her gaze, his own resolve hardening. I'm not leaving you. Not now. She smiled faintly, then turned back to the commander. What's our next move? The commander gestured to the holographic map. We've received intelligence that the traitors are building a weapon, a device capable of destroying entire planets. If they complete it, they'll use it to crush any resistance. The girl's face paled. We can't let that happen. Where are they building it? On a heavily fortified planet in the Andarian system, the commander replied. It's nearly impossible to infiltrate, but we have a plan. He explained the details of the mission, and the boy listened intently. It was a daring plan, involving a small team sneaking onto the planet and sabotaging the weapon before it could be completed. The risks were high, but the stakes were even higher. When the commander finished, the girl nodded. We'll leave at once. Assemble the team. The commander saluted and left the room, leaving the boy and the girl alone. The boy turned to her, his heart pounding. Are you sure about this? It sounds dangerous. She looked at him, her expression serious. It is. But we don't have a choice. If we don't stop them, millions of lives will be lost. The boy swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had never been in a situation like this before. But as he looked at the girl, he knew he couldn't back down. I'll do whatever it takes to help you. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch reassuring. I know you will. And that's why I'm glad you're here. The door opened again, and the commander returned with a small group of soldiers. They were dressed in sleek black armor, their faces hidden behind helmets. The girl introduced them to the boy, but their names and faces blurred together in his mind. All he could think about was the mission ahead. As they prepared to leave, the boy felt a surge of fear and excitement. He had no idea what he was getting himself into, but he knew one thing for certain: he was ready to fight for something bigger than himself. The rebel ship was small and fast, designed for stealth. The boy sat in the corner of the cramped cabin, his hands gripping the edge of his seat as the ship hurtled through hyperspace. Around him, the rebel soldiers checked their weapons and equipment, their movements precise and practiced. The girl sat across from him, her face calm, but her eyes filled with determination. The commander approached them, holding a small device in his hand. This is a holographic map of the facility, he explained, projecting a 3D image into the air. The weapon is located in the central chamber, here. He pointed to a glowing red dot. Our mission is to infiltrate the facility, plant explosives at key points, and get out before the weapon is activated. The boy stared at the map, his heart pounding. The facility was massive, with countless corridors and security checkpoints. It seemed impossible to get in and out without being caught. The girl noticed his expression and leaned closer. We'll be fine, she said softly. Just stick close to me and follow my lead. The boy nodded, though he wasn't entirely convinced. He had never been in a situation like this before, and the thought of facing armed soldiers was terrifying. But he couldn't back down now. Not when so much was at stake. The ship dropped out of hyperspace, and the planet came into view. It was a barren, rocky world, its surface covered in dark, jagged mountains. The facility was nestled in a deep valley, its towering walls bristling with weapons and surveillance equipment. The pilot guided the ship into a narrow canyon, landing it in a hidden crevice. This is as close as we can get, he said. From here, it's on foot. The team disembarked, moving quickly and quietly through the rocky terrain. The boy stayed close to the girl, his heart racing with every step. The air was cold. The ship soared through the stars, leaving the burning planet far behind. The boy sat in silence, staring out the window at the endless expanse of space. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, relief, guilt, and a deep, aching sadness. They had succeeded in their mission, but the cost had been high. The commander and the rebel soldiers who had stayed behind to hold off the enemy were gone, their fate all too clear. The girl sat across from him, her face pale and her eyes distant. She had barely spoken since they had boarded the ship, and the boy could see the weight of everything pressing down on her. He wanted to say something, to comfort her, but he didn't know where to begin. Finally, he broke the silence. "Do you think they made it out?" The girl looked at him, her expression filled with sorrow. "I don't know," she said softly. "But they knew the risks. They gave their lives to protect the Empire, and us." The boy nodded, though it didn't make him feel any better. He had only known the commander and the soldiers for a short time, but their bravery had left a lasting impression on him. They had sacrificed everything for a cause they believed in, and he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of respect and guilt. He had survived, while they had not. The girl reached over and placed a hand on his arm. "You did well back there," she said. "I know it wasn't easy, but you stayed strong. That's what matters." The boy looked at her, surprised by her words. "I didn't do much," he said quietly. "I just followed you." She shook her head. "You did more than you realize. You stayed by my side even when things got dangerous. That takes courage." The boy felt a flicker of warmth at her words, but it was quickly overshadowed by the heaviness in his chest. "What happens now?" he asked. "Where do we go from here?" The girl sighed, leaning back in her seat. "We need to regroup. The rebels have other outposts, and we'll need their help to take back the Empire. But it won't be easy. The traitors will be even more determined now that we've destroyed their weapon." The boy nodded, though the thought of facing more danger made his stomach churn. He had never asked for any of this. He had just been a simple boy from a small village, living a quiet life. But now, he was caught up in something much bigger than himself, something that would change him forever. As the ship flew on, the boy's thoughts turned to his village. He wondered if he would ever see it again, if he would ever return to the life he had known. Part of him longed for that simplicity, for the comfort of familiar faces and routines. But another part of him knew that he couldn't go back. Not after everything he had seen and done. The girl seemed to sense his inner turmoil. "You're thinking about home, aren't you?" she asked. The boy nodded. "I miss it," he admitted. "But I know I can't go back." "Not yet." The girl gave him a small, understanding smile. "I know how you feel. I miss my home too. But we have to keep going. For the people who are counting on us." The boy looked at her, his resolve hardening. "I'll stay with you," he said. "Until the end." Her smile widened, and for the first time since the mission, he saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "That means more to me than you know." The ship's pilot interrupted their conversation, his voice crackling over the intercom. "We're approaching the next outpost. Prepare for landing." The girl stood up, her expression shifting back to one of determination. "Let's go. We have work to do." The boy followed her to the front of the ship, where a small, hidden outpost came into view. It was nestled on a remote moon, its surface covered in dense forests and rocky terrain. The outpost itself was well hidden, its structures blending seamlessly with the environment. As the ship landed, a group of rebels approached, their faces filled with relief when they saw the girl. "Your Highness," one of them said, bowing slightly. "We're glad you're safe." The girl nodded. "Thank you. We have much to discuss. The traitors are growing stronger, and we need to act quickly." The rebels led them into the outpost, where they were greeted by a small but dedicated group of fighters. The girl immediately took charge, outlining their next steps and rallying the rebels for the battles to come. The boy watched her in awe, marveling at her strength and leadership. As the meeting ended, the girl turned to the boy. "We'll rest here for a while," she said. "But soon, we'll need to move again. The fight isn't over." The boy nodded, feeling a mix of exhaustion and determination. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: he would stand by her side, no matter what. The rebel outpost was a hive of activity. Fighters moved quickly through the corridors. preparing weapons and equipment for the battles to come. The boy watched it all with a mix of awe and unease. He had never been surrounded by so much energy and purpose, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing against time. The girl stood at the center of it all, her presence commanding respect. She spoke with the rebel leaders, her voice steady and determined as she outlined their strategy. The boy admired her strength, but he could also see the weight of responsibility in her eyes. She was carrying the hopes of an entire empire on her shoulders, and it was taking its toll. As the meeting ended, the girl approached the boy, her expression softening. "How are you holding up?" she asked. He shrugged, trying to appear braver than he felt. "I'm okay. Just trying to keep up with everything." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "It's a lot to take in. But you're doing better than you think." The boy managed a small smile. "Thanks. I just wish I could do more to help." "You're already helping," she said. "Just by being here, by standing with me, you're making a difference." Her words comforted him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out of place. He wasn't a soldier or a leader. He was just a boy from a village, caught up in something far beyond his understanding. Later that evening, the boy found himself sitting alone on a rocky outcrop outside the outpost. The moon's surface was bathed in a soft, silvery light, and the stars above seemed closer than ever. He stared up at them, his mind racing with thoughts of home, of the girl, and of the battles yet to come. The girl found him there, her footsteps quiet against the rocky ground. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. He shook his head, and she sat down beside him, her gaze fixed on the stars. For a while, they sat in silence, the weight of everything unspoken between them. Finally, the girl spoke. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like if none of this had happened? If we were just ordinary people, living ordinary lives?" The boy nodded. "All the time. I think about my village, about the life I used to have. It feels like a dream now." "I think about it too," she admitted. "But then I remember why we're doing this. Why we have to keep fighting." The boy looked at her, his heart aching for the girl who had lost so much. "Do you ever feel like it's too much? Like you can't keep going?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes. But then I think about the people who are counting on me. About the future we're fighting for. And I know I can't give up." Her words resonated with the boy, filling him with a sense of purpose. He might not be a soldier or a leader, but he could be there for her. He could help her carry the weight of everything. The next morning, the outpost was abuzz with news. Scouts had reported increased activity among the traitors' forces. They were gathering their armies, preparing for a massive assault. The rebels knew they had to act quickly. The girl called a meeting, her voice firm and resolute. "We can't wait any longer," she said. "We need to strike before they do. Our intelligence suggests they're planning to attack the outer colonies. If we can intercept them, we might be able to stop them before they gain more ground." The rebels nodded, their faces filled with determination. The boy listened intently, his heart pounding. He knew this was it, the moment they had been preparing for. As the meeting ended, the girl turned to the boy. "I need you to stay here," she said. "It's going to be dangerous, and I can't risk losing you." The boy shook his head. "I'm not staying behind. I'm coming with you." She looked at him, her eyes filled with conflict. "I can't ask you to do that. You've already done so much." "You're not asking," he said firmly. "I'm choosing to stand with you. No matter what." The girl studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. But stay close to me. And if things get too dangerous, promise me you'll get out of there." The boy nodded, though he had no intention of leaving her side. He had come too far to turn back now. As the rebels prepared for battle, the boy felt a strange sense of calm. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: he would face it with her. The rebel fleet moved swiftly through space, their ships cutting through the darkness like silent shadows. The boy sat in the cockpit of one of the smaller vessels, his hands gripping the edge of his seat as they approached the traitor's armada. The girl was beside him, her eyes fixed on the holographic map that displayed the enemy's positions. "They're heavily fortified," she said, her voice calm but tense. "But if we can break through their defenses, we might be able to disable their command ship." The boy nodded, though his heart was pounding. He had never been in a battle like this before, and the sheer scale of it was overwhelming. The traitors' fleet was massive, their ships bristling with weapons and surrounded by smaller fighter craft. It seemed impossible that the rebels could stand against them. The girl placed a hand on his arm, her touch reassuring. "Stay close to me," she said. "And remember what I told you. If things get too dangerous, you need to get out of here." The boy nodded again, though he had no intention of leaving her side. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to back down now. The rebel fleet moved into position, their ships spreading out to flank the enemy. The girl gave the signal, and the battle began. The traitors' ships opened fire, their weapons lighting up the darkness with bursts of energy. The rebel ships dodged and weaved, returning fire as they closed in on the enemy. The boy's stomach churned as their ship rocked violently, the sound of explosions echoing through the hull. The girl was calm and focused, her hands moving quickly over the controls. "We need to get closer to the command ship," she said. "That's our only chance." The pilot nodded, guiding the ship through the chaos. The boy watched in awe as the girl directed the battle, her voice steady and commanding. She was a natural leader, and it was clear that the rebels trusted her completely. As they neared the command ship, the traitors' fighters swarmed around them, their weapons firing relentlessly. The boy's heart raced as their ship was hit, the lights flickering and alarms blaring. "We're losing power," the pilot shouted. "We need to pull back." The girl shook her head. "We can't. This is our only chance." She turned to the boy, her eyes filled with determination. "I need you to trust me," she said. "We're going to board the command ship." The boy's eyes widened. "How?" The girl activated a small device on her wrist, and a holographic map of the command ship appeared. "There's a docking port here," she said, pointing to a spot on the map. "If we can get close enough, we can board it and disable their systems from the inside." The boy nodded, though his stomach was in knots. This was even more dangerous than he had imagined, but he knew they had no other choice. The pilot guided the ship closer to the command ship, dodging enemy fire as they went. The girl and the boy prepared to board, their weapons ready. As the ship docked, the girl turned to the boy one last time. "Stay close to me," she said. "And whatever happens, don't stop." The boy nodded, and they stepped onto the command ship, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. The ship was eerily quiet, the only sound the hum of the engines. They moved quickly through the ship, avoiding patrols and security systems. The girl's knowledge of the ship's layout was invaluable, and they reached the control room without being detected. Inside, the traitors' leaders were gathered around a holographic map, their voices filled with tension. The girl and the boy hid in the shadows, watching as the leaders discussed their plans. "We need to act now," the girl whispered. "If we can disable their systems, we can give the rebels the advantage." The boy nodded, and they moved into position. The girl activated a device on her wrist, and the control panels in the room flickered and died. The leaders turned in confusion, their voices rising in alarm. "Now," the girl shouted, and they opened fire. The battle inside the command ship was intense, the boy and the girl fighting side by side against the traitors' leaders. The boy's heart raced as he fired his weapon, his hands trembling but his aim steady. He had never been in a fight like this before, but he knew he couldn't let the girl down. Finally, the last of the leaders fell, and the control room was silent. The girl quickly accessed the ship's systems, disabling the traitors' weapons and communications. "It's done," she said, her voice filled with relief. "The rebels will have the advantage now." The boy nodded, though his legs felt like jelly. They had done it. They had turned the tide of the battle. As they made their way back to their ship, the boy felt a surge of pride. He had faced his fears and stood by the girl's side, and together, they had made a difference. But as they stepped onto their ship, the girl's expression turned grim. "It's not over yet," she said. "We still have a long way to go." The boy nodded, his resolve hardening. He was ready to face whatever came next. The rebel fleet, now with the upper hand, pressed their advantage against the traitors' armada. With the command ship disabled, the enemy forces were in disarray, their coordination shattered. The girl and the boy watched from their ship as the rebels systematically dismantled the traitors' defenses. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, victory seemed within reach. The girl turned to the boy, her face serious. "There's one last thing we need to do," she said. "The traitors' leader is still out there. If we don't stop him, he'll regroup and come back stronger." The boy nodded, though his heart sank at the thought of facing yet another danger. "Where is he?" The girl pulled up a holographic map, pointing to a small, heavily fortified station orbiting a nearby planet. "He's here. This is his stronghold. If we can take him down, the war will be over." The boy took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Then let's finish this." The girl gave him a small, appreciative smile. "You've come so far. I couldn't have done this without you." The boy felt a surge of pride at her words, but he also felt the weight of what lay ahead. This was it, the final battle. The moment that would determine the fate of the Empire. The rebel fleet moved toward the station, their ships forming a tight formation. The traitors' leader had anticipated their arrival, and the station's defenses were fully operational. Laser fire and missiles streaked through the void, lighting up the darkness with bursts of light and energy. The girl's ship weaved through the chaos, dodging enemy fire as it approached the station. The boy's hands were clenched into fists, his knuckles white as he watched the battle unfold. The girl was calm and focused, her eyes fixed on the station ahead. "We'll need to board the station," she said. "It's the only way to reach him." The boy nodded, though his stomach churned at the thought. Boarding the station meant facing the traitors' leader head-on, and he had no idea what to expect. As the ship docked, the girl and the boy prepared to disembark. The girl handed the boy a small device. "This will disrupt their security systems," she explained. "Stay close to me, and don't hesitate." The boy took the device, his hands trembling slightly. He followed the girl off the ship and into the station, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. The station was eerily quiet, the only sound the hum of the engines. They moved quickly, avoiding patrols and security systems. The girl's knowledge of the station's layout was invaluable, and they reached the control room without being detected. Inside, the traitors' leader stood alone, his back to them as he studied a holographic map. He was a tall, imposing figure, his face etched with lines of anger and determination. He turned as they entered, his eyes narrowing. "So, you've come," he said, his voice cold and mocking. "I knew you wouldn't give up." The girl stepped forward, her weapon raised. "It's over," she said firmly. "Your forces are defeated. Surrender now, and I'll spare your life." The leader laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think this is over? You're just a child, playing at being a leader. You have no idea what it takes to rule an empire." The girl's expression hardened. "I know enough to see that you've brought nothing but pain and suffering. It ends here." The leader's eyes flicked to the boy, and a sneer twisted his lips. "And who's this? Your little pet? Pathetic." The boy felt a surge of anger, but he stayed silent, his grip tightening on the device in his hand. The leader raised his weapon, his movements slow and deliberate. "If you want to stop me, you'll have to kill me. But I doubt you have the stomach for it." The girl hesitated, her weapon wavering slightly. The boy could see the conflict in her eyes, the desire to end the war, but the reluctance to take a life. The leader saw her hesitation and smirked. "I thought so." In that moment, the boy acted. He activated the device, and the room was plunged into darkness. The leader cursed, firing blindly into the shadows. The boy grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her out of the line of fire. "We need to go," he shouted. The girl nodded, and they ran through the darkened corridors, the sound of the leader's footsteps echoing behind them. They reached a control panel, and the girl quickly accessed the station's systems. "I'm setting the station to self-destruct," she said. "It's the only way to stop him." The boy's heart raced. "What about us?" The girl gave him a small, reassuring smile. "We'll make it. Trust me." She activated the self-destruct sequence, and the station's alarms blared. The boy and the girl ran back to their ship, the sound of the alarms ringing in their ears. As they boarded the ship, the station began to collapse, its structure buckling under the force of the explosions. The pilot took off, the ship lurching as it ascended into the sky. The boy watched through the window as the station was consumed by flames, his heart pounding with a mix of relief and fear. They had done it. They had stopped the traitor's leader and ended the war. As the ship flew away from the station, the girl turned to the boy, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You saved me back there," she said. "I couldn't have done it without you." The boy shook his head. "We did it together. That's what matters." The girl smiled, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the boy saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "It's over," she said softly. "We can finally start rebuilding." The boy nodded, though he knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. But he also knew that they had faced the worst and come out stronger. As the ship flew through the stars, the boy felt a sense of peace. He had started this journey as a simple boy from a small village, but he had become something more. He had found courage, purpose, and a friend who had changed his life forever. And as he looked out at the stars, he knew that no matter what the future held, he would face it with hope.